So we're going to bring some chairs up and have our panelists join us. I'm going to do some quick introductions now as they're coming up, and then we're going to jump right into it. Sarah Brundage, President and CEO of the National Association of Affordable Housing Lenders. It was a Senior Policy Advisor at the Domestic Policy Council in the White House in the Biden administration. Also served as Senior Advisor for Housing Supply and Infrastructure at HUD. Rodney Harrell, Rodney Harrell, Vice President of Dr. Rodney Harrell, just to be clear, Vice President for Family, Home, and Community at AARP. He also invented the award-winning AARP Livability Index, the first of its kind to measure the livability of every neighborhood and community in America. Laura Arce, Senior Vice President for Economic Initiatives at Unidos US, architect and leader of the Homeownership Means Equity or HOME initiative, a multi-year movement to transform the economic trajectory of Latinos through homeownership. Mark Ryland, is the president and CEO of the National Equity Fund. NEF is a leader in the nonprofit multifamily affordable real estate investment management and has a mission to create and deliver innovative, collaborative financial solutions to expand the creation, preservation of affordable housing. It's a part of LISC, also a member of our board. So with that, let's get started. Thank you for joining us. And let's talk about the high cost of housing. Huge issue facing Americans, a driving motivation in the election, a driver of inflation. And I think one of the factors that led to a pretty broad group of voters who voted both Democrat and Republican saying, this ain't working for me. So let's start with Sarah. You worked in the Biden White House. You're running a big coalition of affordable housing organizations. How do you see things unfolding, and where do we go from here?
Yeah, thanks for having us. I think those of us who are in the affordable housing advocacy space and have been for some time are all taking in this moment where our priorities are finally getting the attention that we know they've deserved for a long time. And unfortunately, that's due to decades of underinvestment and neglect. But we are here, and I'm hopeful because I do think housing affordability is a nonpartisan issue, not just nonpartisan, one ripe for bipartisan solutions. I think the question is, will this next administration meet the moment and not let it become politicized? And the Biden-Harris administration did take tremendous steps to elevate affordable housing issues ranging from supply to tenant protections to home ownership. And, you know, I hope that the next administration does not throw everything out just because of who happened to be in office when it was really starting to, I think, get the attention that we know it needs, both reflected in polls and just conversations with stakeholders. So I think we are at a crisis. We've been saying that for a long time, but crisis can create unexpected alliances and opportunities, both politically and in terms of policy opportunities. So,
Rodney, AARP has become a real leader in this issue and is a powerhouse when it comes to influencing Congress. And so tell me a little bit about how you're thinking about this in the future.
Yeah, thanks for the question, David. And, you know, to Sarah's point, we've had a housing crisis for a while, and I think we're at a point where we're starting to recognize that crisis exists. That recognition is getting more and more widespread, not just amongst the people in this room, but amongst the general population. We've got it as a part of the platform of both parties, and we've seen it, to your point, with the senator, in so much of the discourse that's going on. So now we've got an opportunity, I think, to really talk about some of the issues that have plagued folks for a while. For ARP, we've been thinking about the 10,000 people who are turning 65 every day, and knowing that our housing stock doesn't have the options that folks need, the physical features, and they're not in the locations that work for folks, and there's just not affordability there. We've got tens of millions of folks that are housing cost burden. And so the idea that we can use this opportunity to think about bringing supply in and the intersection of housing with other major issues. I think about the nearly 200,000 folks that died in nursing homes during the peak of COVID. And the number one thing that keeps people from moving out of nursing homes is not having housing that's affordable and that meets their needs. And so, again, it can have deadly consequences, this lack of housing supply that's affordable, that works for you. And I think we have an opportunity now with the higher profile of these housing issues to start to address some of these persistent problems and address them holistically.
Laura, you represent a very diverse demographic, and it's interesting because it's both underserved in some ways and also has had record traction in moving the ball forward. Housing supply is not going to allow the kind of growth we need unless we really step that up. How are you looking at this, and what do you see as the both opportunities and things you're concerned about as we look ahead?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for having me, and good morning, everyone. You know, for us at Unidos and for me, it was a very clear mandate from the election, and that's that families are struggling with the cost of living, and housing is on the top of that list. And so, you know, at Unidos, a lot of our focus around homeownership, and particularly on housing supply, is the fact that we see housing supply as a civil rights issue of our time. It's the primary barrier right now in terms of closing the wealth gap and closing the homeownership gap, so we're very much focused on that. What I'm really hoping to see from the incoming administration, you know, really building on Sarah's point, is that, you know, we're able to maintain this you know, coalition that we've built around elevating housing as a priority for this country is a bipartisan issue, because at the bottom line it is, as you know, to Ronnie's point, it's affecting communities in urban, rural, suburban communities across the country. It's not only just a coastal issue. And so thinking about the incoming administration, if I were in their shoes, I would first be thinking about some early wins and where's the momentum. We know all the conversations about the tax package. So in my view, it would be a huge miss if the tax package did not include, you know, some provisions that are specifically around housing supply, both on the rental side as well as on the homeownership side. And, you know, I would also add that I know many of us are still feeling a little bit like we're recovering from last month's election, but guess what? We're gearing up for midterms in a couple of years, and that time goes by really fast. And so I also think the administration needs to be looking about some early wins. And the bottom line is that housing supply, those aren't quick wins there. I mean, we have to be willing to make those investments. And so I think there's still space on the demand side to think about, you know, first-gen home buyers, you know, filling that affordability gap. And I think the tax package could be another opportunity there. So I think in terms of just looking for some momentums, focusing on housing supply, and really, you know, looking at what voters, I think, was a very, very clear message, because they're going to be sending another message in a couple of years, and they're going to need something to put behind what their promises have been.
And Matt, you actually are the guy on the panel with mud on his boots, as I like to say. I said that to Linda Manalini from Eden Housing once, and she said, "There are mud on my boots. Would you like to go out to the trunk of my car? I'll show you." But you're investing in housing. How are you experiencing this, and what do you think we need the most?
So let me tell a quick story. I have a 6-year-old son, and leading up to the election, we'd be in the car, we'd be at home, we have the radio on, have the news on, and every time either one of the candidates said something about affordable housing, he'd chime in and say, "Dad, that's what you do."
Awesome.
I think that that's telling that you have both political parties leaning into affordable housing, and even a 6-year-old understanding the need for more affordable housing in this country. In my day job, I joke with our team when we're making an investment, we get a market study that talks about why this is a wise investment and how it's going to be absorbed into the market. And I joke with them and say, we should stop paying for these, because they all say we need more affordable housing. It's going to lease up instantly. And that's the reality. We see continued very strong interest from our investors, from lenders in this space. They understand the need, both from a societal benefit, but also from the high quality of the investment. at the end of the day, we need more resources to get this done. And so we see the real opportunity with the provisions of the Affordable Housing Credit Improvement Act that's going to expand and revise the low-income housing tax credit and the broad support for that as a real platform to bring this front and center quickly to find a new win for the incoming government and administration. I will say this is not something, and building on something that Laura said, this is not something that happens overnight. There can be a quick win, there can be new resources that come online, but this will take years, year, 2, 3 years for these resources to be absorbed and for us to see the impacts of that. And so I think as both investors, as practitioners, as advocates, we need to remind people that we didn't end up in this situation overnight, and we're not going to get ourselves out of it overnight. And so we need to keep on talking about this as a persistent problem that requires persistent solutions.
Thank you. And just want to remind people that if you go to the app, you want to ask a question, just type it in under Ask a Question. It'll show up on my screen, and we'll get to them. Sarah, we've got an opportunity coming up, a big tax bill. You have been working on Affordable Housing Credit Improvement Act for a long time, and going back to your years at Enterprise and the Action Coalition. Neighborhood Homes Investment Act, something that Nal has been very involved in from day one. Housing has a really bad habit of being number 4 on a list of 3 things that get done. And we have a huge chest full of participant ribbons. How are we going to meddle in these 2 bills?
Yeah. I mean, I'm looking out at this room and I see everyone we partner with, both folks in other organizations and from the Hill, and we've really gone through it, and I can say, I mean, there are people in this room who really were in the trenches. It was a failure to not have housing in the infrastructure bill, and it was a failure to not have more substantial housing in the climate bill. And, now we just need to keep doing what we've been doing, but more aggressively to make sure we're in whatever vehicle that's moving. And I know that always presents really tough trade-offs in the bigger policy realm, but the reality is that potentially, most likely a reconciliation tax bill with only Republican votes is going to be the best shot to get substantial investments for, again, relief for renters and homeowners, and those being those key provisions from the Affordable Housing Credit Improvement Act, as well as an enactment of the Neighborhood Homes Investment Act. And I know we'll talk about opportunity zones later, and also new markets having an extension as well. I think that's the realm of community development. But I do think the message that Congress cannot pass another major bill without providing substantial relief to renters and homeowners alike is one that everyone in this room needs to be kind of in unison around. And we've done, really excellent advocacy work to build bipartisan support for both. I was really happy to see Senator Warner here. And we're looking forward to reintroduction of the Neighborhood Homes Investment Act. I think notably we recently got Senator Tim Scott on to support the bill, who is on the Finance Committee, but notably will be chairing the Senate Banking Committee as well. And so we're just doing everything we can to, again, build up that bipartisan support. And I think we have a shot. I mean, there's going to be it's not a smooth path. It's not a guaranteed path. It's interesting to hear Senator Warner talk about the potential of them splitting 2 bills. To your point, though, I think that the first 100 days are going to be a roller coaster for all of us. And I hope that the administration shares wins and resources and injections of support and not just deregulation. But I think that the window for the Republican trifecta to pass a big bill is going to be in their first 6 months. And so the work is happening now, and everyone needs to be engaging. And, you can fall into a bill at the final hour, and you can fall out of a bill at the final hour. And this is going to be an extremely expensive package. And to me, that's our biggest competition, is the price tag of the whole bill. We are, as you and I say, a rounding error. So we should be.
That's helpful.
Yeah.
In this game, that's helpful. And I would want to just encourage everybody, get your rest. because the most important things happen at 3 o'clock in the morning, and if you're sleeping, you're not in that conversation. We've got an opportunity because inflation is a driver of voter turnout and of voting preferences. And and housing is a driver of inflation. And it's a cautionary tale to particularly House members and members of the Senate who are up for re-election in 2 years, that they'll pay a price.
And I want to let others chime in on this too, but I think, yes, housing has to be part of the macro conversation about the economy, but I also think everyone needs to really represent the communities you work and live and serve, and this is also about local economies, and you'll see from NAHL and the Neighborhood Homes Coalition a lot of messaging about homes are where jobs go to live. You know, I think a lot of members of Congress understand more and more that their communities are either not able to build affordable home ownership supply, people are struggling to afford to stay there, or they don't have the supply to attract jobs that they need to revitalize their local economies. And so, yes, it's a big inflation conversation, but it's also, you know, I think bringing it down to that local economy level is going to be important too.
Rodney?
Well, just to follow up on that, I think one of the things I like about the Neighborhood Homes Investment Act is its focus on place within communities. And David mentioned our livability index earlier. I looked at some of these places that would be able to benefit from that legislation, and you're seeing that some of these places have the infrastructure in place. They've got proximity to things that they may need, like transportation. The senator mentioned some of this as well, that some of these infrastructure pieces are there, and if we'd add housing that works for folks, maybe that's the thing that takes it up a level. So one thing I always find is there's so many trade-offs to these places, and if we make one or two changes, that may boost something past the line to really try to make it a more accessible or more a place that really benefits people more. And so these place-based approaches, the idea that we need to think about where we're investing, I think is a key piece as well.
And Matt, what are you looking for in the tax bill?
Well, I mentioned earlier so did Sarah, the Affordable Housing Credit Improvement Act, which contains a dozen or so different specific provisions, but we are excited about the prospect of two of the biggest provisions being included in a tax package. One being the roughly 50% increase of the allocated tax credits to the state HFAs, and then the other being the reduction in something called the 50% test, which allows more nonprofit bonds to be used for the creation of affordable housing. Net, that's, and I saw Michael Novogradac in the audience, and I think his team did analysis. That's going to result in about 1.3 million incremental new affordable units. So that's very exciting. It creates a lot of opportunity on the ground for states to allocate credits in their own priorities for the preservation of affordable housing. I think one of the other provisions beyond the expansion of the availability of credits, as we see housing now, the LIHTC program be 30, 35 years old, you want to see that housing stay affordable, and so focusing on preservation. There's some provisions there that would allow it easier to what we call re-syndicate the tax credits, allowing those buildings to remain, those properties to remain affordable. It's a little bit complicated in some instances to do that now. It creates a little bit of friction, and you see some of those properties going to market rate. And with some of these changes, we would reduce the hurdles to get that done and maintain long-term affordability on these properties. So we don't have to build a new unit, we just maintain an existing unit, which is obviously much more cost-effective.
Laura, tell me a little bit about how the communities you focus on have experienced opportunity zones. And, we're going to be talking about what's new that the program needs. How are you looking at that as well?
Yeah, so I think, I certainly agree with Rodney on the power of these place-based initiatives and looking at specific communities and what the challenges are there, what the opportunities are. I think for, opportunity zones, 1.0, I mean, the intention is there, and certainly that's really great. I think, there were some shortcomings, I think, in terms of like the number of communities at the end of the day really saw big benefit from opportunity zones. I'm very open to looking at the program again and hopefully enhancing that to have more impact on a broader array of communities in different parts of the country, and really thinking about what we mean around job creation. Are these, permanent jobs? Are they quality jobs? What are the impacts, on the ground? So I think there's a lot of room there, and I know there are a lot of folks who are really digging deep into that. And I'll also just kind of flag that sometimes, I'm thinking about Sarah's comment about, not kind of throwing, the baby out with the bathwater, and like whenever there's sort of a new administration or new folks in town, and it's natural, you kind of want to have your thing that you name and you create it. But there's a lot of really great programs working now, and sometimes by just investing more in those, and I think very much about the CDFI fund and the CDFI industry and how much impact is there. There's a really long, strong track record, and so maybe enhancing and investing on what's already working can get us some really big impact in the shorter and nearer term. So that's what I would add there, and certainly in the CDFI space, I see a lot of opportunity there.
Rodney, anything else on that?
Well, I think it's, one thing I want to say generally as we're talking about all these policies is that the scope of the problem is so large that and all of these approaches, I think, can take a bite at the puzzle. There's no silver bullets. There's no one-size-fits-all solution. So there's great possibilities to move things forward here. One other piece of legislation I'll just talk about briefly that I'm excited about is the Yes in My Backyard bill and the possibilities there. And to really motivate, back to our point about localities, that local areas can make the zoning changes and changes that they need to create more housing options too. So there's lots of possibilities here, and any one of them, I think, takes a bite of the issue, and that's progress.
And I believe that's on the House floor this week.
That's right.
David, would you mind if I just
Yeah,
talk
please jump in.
about opportunity zones just for a minute? So I agree that we need to have as broad of a tool chest as possible to address the affordable housing crisis, and opportunity zones should be part of that. This sounds like semantics in some respects, but I want to highlight the difference between a tax credit and the opportunity zones. Opportunity zones is an incentive, not a subsidy. And by nature, most affordable housing requires a certain amount of subsidy. And so I think, and you couple that with the design of the incentive of the opportunity zones, which is about encouraging investment in high growth businesses and properties. And by nature, by definition, affordable housing is not going to have that same value growth over a period of time as a market rate property. So when we think about opportunity zones in the context of affordable housing, I think we want to think about can you pair that up with other subsidies, make it easier for those two to work together in conjunction in order to capture the benefits. So 1 + 1 = 3. In a dream world, I would also say, how can we create more incentive for investors if you look at the underlying asset? So to say that the affordable housing and other community development initiatives would get an even bigger incentive through opportunity zones in contrast to market rate investment opportunities.
And there's an opportunity in the Senate because we have one of the original authors of the Opportunity Zone bill chairing the Banking Committee. Staff's already reached out to us to say, let's talk about what 2.0 would look like. And he has his own housing bill, which is an opportunity to put into authorizing language some of the things you can't do in reconciliation. So when we look at that, what we're really talking about is public-private partnerships in both cases, in all three actually, LIHTC, neighborhood homes, and opportunity zones. Matt, how have you experienced that? And we'll just go down the line to talk about some of your thoughts on how we can leverage interest in public-private partnerships in a new administration.
So, color me biased, right? I run a company that's focused on LIHTC, but I think LIHTC is perhaps the best example in our modern country of a public-private partnership where you have some of the world's largest financial institutions working with some of the country's smallest grassroots nonprofits delivering affordable housing, with the government at every level involved, everything from HUD and IRS to the state HFAs to local states and governments providing additional subsidy. So, I think that power, when you talk about the coalitions, which we're members of, whether it's NAL or the Affordable Housing Tax Credit Coalition, you have this broad constituency that's all aligned in moving forward these programs and expanding resources, albeit with their own idiosyncratic motivations, but at the end of the day, all reaching for the same goal. And so, sitting in the middle of that as a investment manager and syndicator of the tax credits, we see real power in that. And we can parcel off who's going to be the most effective in front of which policymaker or which elected official. And so we do continue to see that as a real true path forward, and it attracts investment. I mean, that is, at the end of the day, the structure. Everyone talks about ESG, and sometimes governance gets left off. Everyone's focused on environment and social, but the public-private partnership, by definition, creates this incredible governance structure that attracts investments. You have world-class financial institutions willing to put money into affordable housing because of the public-private partnership framework that creates strong governance.
Rodney?
Yeah, for me, public-private partnerships are crucial, and there's another P I'll put in there, which is people, right? And the idea that we need to drive all of those pieces to get the policy changes and the changes to our communities we need. To your point, we can't have the market working without the incentives that they need. We can't get the legislation going if the people needs of the individuals in the community are being met. And we also need to make sure that people are supporting and not opposing the kind of policies that impact them. That's that YIMBY Act is an example of moving some of those policies too. And just the idea, though, with the partnerships piece that we can't have one skill and rely on that one skill alone. We have to have the investment in the communities that relates to the needs that the people in that community are facing, and that moves the market as well. And so I think they'll be crucial moving forward, and I think it's a crucial part of getting our supply challenges met.
Sarah?
Yeah, so NAL's membership, we really do represent that alliance of public-private nonprofit lenders, and there's little I could say that hasn't been said. I think P3s have an important role to play because private, capital we can have more resources than we'll ever see Congress pass. The private sector can act with greater innovation and efficiency often. But I do want to also acknowledge there are other forms of policy where the federal government has been able to unlock, more resources and capacity, and the private sector, I think we should expand that to explicitly include the nonprofit sector and CDFIs. And, I've been just even sitting on the stage thinking, today is so different than it was in 2016. And it would be really short-sighted for, staff in the new administration to come in and do the whole light switch on and off, just back to 2016, because the world is different. And there are things that have been turned on or turned off in the last 4 years that, are really critical to not become victim to this political football game. And I almost don't want to name them because you're scared of creating a serving platter of things for them to consider looking at. But there are ways that we empower CDFIs in particular and other non-government partners beyond just LIHTC and some of these tax structures. But I also just want to say, obviously we are here to advance as many bipartisan public-private partnership policies, through Congress, that a key part of this is having a strong federal partner. And it will be a disservice to everyone if, not to jump into appropriations, but if we just see huge cuts to HUD, to USDA, to HHS, to all these agencies that provide critical resources for how we kind of have this whole fabric of housing assistance. And, I think it's safe to anticipate we're going to see a shrinking role of the federal government. And that's going to require private and nonprofit sectors to step up more. and to fill in those gaps more and to be even more innovative and resourceful. But it also requires all of us to kind of continue beating the drum that, yes, we can do that, but we still need a strong partner in the federal government, and those appropriations are a big part of it.
Well, and on that point, I just want to steer everybody to the letter to the editor of the Wall Street Journal that Brian Montgomery recently sent in, FHA administrator for 3 administrations, the only person to ever hold that title for 3 administrations, including 2 Republican and 1 Democrat. He was held over in the Obama administration for 6 months, very unusual, making the point that FHA and Ginnie Mae are negative subsidies. They actually contribute money to the federal government and pay for HUD's programs to a large extent, and there's just no point in cannibalizing that budget, although I'm a big fan of improving these programs, but it's, and there's a lot to improve, but just cutting and burning the budget isn't going to really get us anywhere. Laura, let me ask you if you have more to add on that, and then I want to get to a couple of issues that aren't always on the housing agenda.
Yeah, the only thing, I agree with all the points are made. I guess maybe the only thing I would add is that for as long as any of us in this room have worked in the housing space, you know, housing has been a public-private partnership. That's just what the housing sector is. And so, you know, I take at their word when I talk with home builders, you know, they say we want to build starter homes, we want to build the affordable side, but it's really expensive, and land and labor and, you know, all the regulations and the restrictions makes it really hard. And so I see there a ripe opportunity to have those conversations, you know, both at the local level, but also what are the federal incentives or the federal framework we can do to sort of bridge more of that? Because I think the private sector wants to be at the table, they want to do more. And so how can the public sector, and I also definitely want to bring in the nonprofit sector because they're really big participants in the solution.
So you mentioned home builders. I think that's a perfect segue for me. I was up in New York a couple weeks ago for the Home Builder Roundtable, and 2 issues came up very strongly in terms of concern. One of them is tariffs and how that drives not just the cost of building homes, which you definitely see in the in the softwood timber area or softwood lumber. I have bipartisan criticism on tariffs in lumber, but we also heard a lot of talk about immigration and the risk of mass deportations, particularly among construction workers. I think over 30% of construction workers are foreign-born, and the fear is not just that you could have people who are undocumented being picked up in construction sites, which itself could have a really significant impact, but the fear of people who are perfectly documented being afraid to go to work because friends of theirs or family members could be impacted, or they just might get swept up unfairly, as has been done in the past. So how is Unidos looking at that, and how are some of the other people on the panel thinking about some of these risks that we used to think were tangential, but in fact are going to be very much about housing?
Yeah, no, this is a really important question. And, you know, I want to start by saying, you know, immigrants are documented and undocumented. They're woven into the fabric of our society and our economy. It's not so simple to disentangle this as it may seem sometimes, you know, with the headlines. And to your point, it's true that about 30% of the construction industry, immigrants are the employee base. And I would say that in some sectors of the construction industry, it's significantly higher than that, like drywallers in certain sectors. And in certain parts of the country, especially where we're seeing a lot of demand for building, it's also much higher in places like Arizona, in Nevada, and Texas. It's upwards of 40, 50, and probably even higher in certain cities. And so I want to just start by saying that and flagging that we see immigration and immigrants as part of the housing supply solution. They're not the problem, they're the solution. And so, you know, I'll share that I'm the granddaughter of a bracero. And if you don't know what the bracero program was, I would just share with you that this country has a long history of meeting its labor needs with immigrants. And sadly, we also have a long history of then throwing people away when we think we don't need them anymore. And so I would just caution folks, I think this is a really great opportunity to think comprehensively about immigration reform, think about it compassionately in a way that meets our economic interests, our business interests, but also just addresses, going back to the start of what I said, that immigrants are part of our society. They're our neighbors, they're our friends, they're our teachers, they're our caretakers, they're all of it. And so I would just caution folks that this is an opportunity to really think about immigrants in a new way and think about them as a solution to the challenges that our economy is facing. And we're up here talking about housing supply. Is this, priority now for this nation? And we need all the solutions on the table, and our immigrants are part of that solution.
And can I just ask, are there people in the audience who are of Native American descent? Okay.
One.
All one?
I saw one.
Okay, that all of the rest of us would not be here but for immigration. So I have a grandfather who was an immigrant. I have a great-grandfather who was an immigrant. I have a great-great-grandfather who was an immigrant. I would not be here but for immigration, and I guarantee you that none of those immigration policies at the time were popular, but they were essential. And if we can't get our head around that, I just think, we're not going to be able to grow as a country, and we're not going to be the country that we were intended to be. And finally, I'll just note, Alexander Hamilton, as you know, if you've seen the play or read the book, most of you have seen the play, vilified for being an immigrant. So, and he's on the $10 bill.
I was not born in America, and I've been re-listening to Hamilton as part of my disassociation from reality sometimes.
Excellent.
And I was literally sitting thinking about this and also the unintended consequences of some of these policy proposals. And to quote Hamilton, winning is easy, governing is harder.
Thank you. And immigrants get the job done.
Yeah, I mean, we could just
You
turn
throw
this
that
into a
in there.
Hamilton
We could be
panel.
quoting Hamilton all afternoon, but and we might. That's really good because in 2016, I will admit my wife is a lot more progressive than I am, and she watched the entire series of The West Wing, episode to episode, front to back, for twice actually, in 2016 and 2017, and maybe we'll try Hamilton instead this time. Thank you for the suggestion. Yeah, jump in.
I can't think of a Jed Bartlett quote for this or Alexander Hamilton one, but the conversation does remind me of one of the things I think is a big danger for us and for the administration. And it's about looking at housing in isolation or any of these other issues in isolation and ignoring the intersection between these key issues. We explored immigration here. Think about the intersection between housing and healthcare, for example, for older adults to falls in homes and the ways that can really better housing options can impact on the other side. Think about transportation and housing. I mean, the list goes on, but thinking holistically about how housing has its place within our world and all the other policies that we're looking at and how they intersect, I think is crucial for us to do in order to talk about the importance of housing, to find the budget sometimes for housing programs, and to think about how they impact other parts of the family or the community's bottom line, but also for the administration to think about the unintended consequences of some of these policies on housing and how that might impact us too. So we have to think more holistically and not just think in a siloed thinking. I think it's very dangerous.
Yeah, Matt?
I was going to use, like the intersection, I use the term ricochet. So yesterday, I actually asked our construction monitoring team to pull some real data. So I don't have as powerful as a story as Laura does, but maybe something will resonate. So without tariffs, without immigration issues, we saw the combination of steel and lumber go up anywhere, this is based a little bit on geography, somewhere between 10 and 15% between 2023 projects and 2024 projects. That's just status quo, 10 to 15%. And then on labor, we saw across the country, saw a 5.5% increase in labor costs on projects. So if you think about the ricochet impact of tariffs, of immigration reform, what that would do to just the bottom line costs of affordable housing. And then I would also recommend season 7 of The West Wing to actually talk about New Markets tax credits. Believe it or not,
That's right.
it's there.
That's right. And I'll also note that in 1985, came to Washington. My first job was working for a publication, still exists, called Inside U.S. Trade. And my first article was about softwood timber imports. And you could take that article today, not change a single word except the name of the U.S. Trade representative, and it would still be perfectly reasonable to read and think, oh, yeah, somebody wrote that yesterday. Another point about trade and tariffs. First of all, trade war has never been good for the economy. We have a long history on that. And but if you're trying to build and put online a unit of housing, and you can't get appliances or a transformer, regardless of the cost of supplies, you are not getting a certificate of occupancy. And that unit is going to sit empty until you put those things in there. And I think that's another factor we saw during the supply chain crisis. We could easily see in a trade war, and I'm hoping we're going to be real careful about that. Let's talk about what's happening at the federal level and opportunities that you might see coming with a new administration. How are we going to make the best of a new administration that's focused on disruption? What needs to be disrupted? Laura, you want to get it started?
Oh my goodness. Well, I'll start by saying that I think we all know that there's a lot of waste that happens in the federal government. There's certainly opportunities for doing things more efficiently, looking at what's working well and investing more, in that space. But I think, more broadly, what makes me, most optimistic, a few things that are sort of related. First is this kind of new national focus on housing and recognition that we are in a housing crisis in terms of affordability and supply, and that at least at this point in time, it's a bipartisan issue. And I think, Rodney mentioned the YIMBY Act, a couple of weeks ago. The YIMBY caucus was, announced on Capitol Hill as a bipartisan caucus, which is incredibly exciting. And I think that they're going to be very pragmatic about looking for solutions. And so thinking about those themes. And then I think the other piece is, I'm imagining that with this administration, thinking more around incentives. And so how can we incentivize the type of development or progress that we want? And I think specifically, there's been a lot of really great work in localities in certain states around zoning and land use reforms. And I see our friends from Casita Coalition are here, have done a lot of that great work, like in California and other states. But it's really hard to kind of these onesie twosies, like going to every community in every state. And so if the federal government can create some incentives to encourage local communities to adopt, some of these zoning and land use reforms that can build more types of housing, across the price spectrum in more places, then I see some opportunity there.
Yeah. Sarah?
I think HUD Secretary nominee Scott Turner has a huge opportunity. He could be the one to really transform and champion a new HUD. He should rename it. He should get a new building. They need new elevators. Fill that staff backlog. There's a retirement cliff coming. They need a new IT system. Really, this could be his big idea and really transform HUD and just take it to a new level.
Yes,
Democrats were never going to tear down that building, but I am perfectly happy for Elon Musk to go after it with all the fervor of inventing a 37-engine rocket.
We need the DOT makeover. That's what I think. They need a new shiny building and a lot of investments into the staff. And again, really the IT at HUD needs some help.
Paging Vivek Ramaswamy.
That can be their idea. I'm just putting it out there. But in all seriousness, I think there's an effort at HUD, there has been, to continue to look at how to streamline some of these big programs, how to reduce, I think, the challenges of being a HUD grantee. There is so much work to be done towards that, and this next administration should continue that work. You know, I've been really trying to, I just think we need more nuance when we talk about a culture of deregulation. We've talked about this. There are regulations that absolutely we can streamline to kind of improve the effectiveness, efficiency of programs. There are regulations that protect people, protect renters and homeowners. And they're, you know, so I just think, yes, let's continue working towards streamlining our programs, and yeah, a new HUD would be great.
Well, and you know, when Secretary Turner, assuming he's confirmed, gets into the HUD building, I'm sure the first thing he's going to do walking around the halls is say, why aren't people back to work? And the answer is going to be people are coming to work every day once they tell them to, and there is still a lot of empty offices there. So having too many people is not the problem in the HUD building. Hiring the right people is going to be a big challenge. Attracting folks into government service who have the skill sets we need, and regulatory reform. I mean, this is something you've worked on with the home regs, and we've had many conversations about Section 8. There's no good reason why a landlord wouldn't want to take a HUD voucher, except for all the good reasons, and there are a lot of them, and we need to fix that program.
Yes, and I also think there are other programs that have started to, you know, come back into the mix that they're looking at, like CDBG, and I see some really stay on local kind of champions in the audience too. I know we're going to talk about this too. Mm-hmm. I think it's also really important that they take the time to understand what these programs are and who they serve. And, you know, it's easy to come in and say, we're going to fix everything. But first, I think everyone has a responsibility, certainly political appointees, to understand what's happening first and to treat the career staff with dignity and respect. And really, they're the experts in the building.
Rodney?
Yeah, I'm going to reiterate the things that my previous two panelists said and jump on the regulatory reform bandwagon, that there's so many regulations that make it difficult for nonprofit and for-profit developers to build the kinds of things that we need in the places where we need them. And so anything the administration can do to make that easier could be a positive. And to the point of the YIMBY Act and the onesie-twosie approach at the local level, I think that's necessary as well. And so one thing that AARP has been looking at is what we can do to help support at the state and local level some of those changes needed. We've got a model act, and now on accessory dwelling units. I think over a dozen states have now made statewide policy changes to make it easier to build an accessory apartment on your lot. Middle housing, we've got another act there, and we've got states and dozens of localities adding the ability to build townhouses, duplexes, triplexes, those kinds of things that bring us more housing options and the affordability there too. And so, you know, it's, again, a multi-level thing. The administration can do what they can at their level to make regulations easier, but we also need to work at those state and local levels to get all of that kind of tools in the toolbox ready to get the housing options that we need.
Matt?
I'll keep on the regulatory train here, but I'll go specific and talk about CRA, the Community Reinvestment Act. You know, obviously, anyone that's paying any attention to this, where there's a little bit of a state of limbo, there's not a lot of clarity around what banks should be doing, what they shouldn't be doing, when they're going to have to do it. There's the litigation. So I think anything that the administration can do to provide clarity, first and foremost, so that there can be long-term planning. You know, back to something I referenced earlier, this is not something that happens overnight. Capital and programs need long-term runway to be able to see and have sustainable forms of investment. And so when you have disruption in the regulatory environment that causes short-term decision-making rather than intermediate or long-term decision-making, you see that disruption in the flow of resources to affordable housing. So first and foremost, just clarity. You know, I could talk all day long about what they should actually do within CRA, but you know, I would absolutely be making different investment programs in different asset classes a priority and very clear around what is CRA qualifying to support those initiatives. That and a new IT system at HUD.
But I would also build off, Matt, not just clarity with CRA, but stability. And I do think there are really good, there were really good proposed changes in the final rule, which I think we can all safely anticipate is not going to ever be fully implemented as is. And those should, again, I have 2 babies, and I'm sure babies out with the bathwater is not a good thing to say anymore. So I need a new. But I do think banks really, again, CRA has become this back and forth, and there is room for improvement in what's often referred to as the legacy CRA rule, for sure. But at this point, I think if we did not have another proposed change for a few years and let CRA keep being the powerful tool it is to help drive these public-private partnerships, that would also be really good for the industry.
Yeah, it's there are some things that just don't hold up over time. Setting aside any kind of political correctness, I think baby out with the bathwater may be one of them. Everything in Grimm's fairy tales, pretty much. I think the common theme there is if you don't follow the rules, somebody's going to eat you or kill you. That doesn't really go as well anymore. But let's wrap up with something that's near and dear to my heart. I know a lot of yours. Civil rights and fair housing. The war on woke is here, and there are a lot of places where I think this has been really more of a war on language than on outcomes, and the AFFH regulation that it comes up in the 2025 agenda. It's come up in progressive concerns about the future. The reality is that there is nothing to kill in AFFH because Secretary Todman and her staff, including you, did some incredible work on an AFFH regulation, and the White House chose to do nothing with it. And so there is no AFFH. And this goes back before any worries about the Congressional Review Act. This is back in April and May when some of us were talking to them about that. So we can take that one off the table. But disparate impact, a big deal. And there are a lot of other programs. How are we looking at fair housing and civil rights? And I would also put at the top of my list is special purpose credit programs, because as a conservative myself and with strong libertarian tendencies, the idea of the government telling private companies what they can or cannot do in expanding their markets and managing their employees, I find pretty offensive. And I think shareholders are actually responsible for that. Not sure that I need the government doing that. So let's start with Laura and we'll work down. How are you looking at those issues as we go forward?
Yeah, the first thing I think about, and my work is very much focused on the mortgage and the homeownership space, but we know, thanks to our friends at the Urban Institute and other places, that the future of the mortgage market is Black, Brown, and Asian. That just if you look at household formations, you look at population growth, where the opportunities are, and so. I think it's an imperative. And to your point, I think when I speak with banks and lenders, despite whatever's kind of going on in the headline in the public realm around kind of anti-woke or anti-DEI, they are looking for ways to better serve these markets. And the truth is that, particularly in the mortgage space, we haven't changed that much in the last few decades in terms of how we assess credit risk. And you think about how differently we live our economic lives today, and especially in communities of color and immigrant communities. And it's not that it's riskier, it's just different. Thinking about, higher rates of self-employment, gig work, multi-generational households, all those things. And so I think if you are, a lender, a home builder, anyone in the mortgage, or housing sector who's in the business and wants to still be in the business in 20 years, you got to look at how to serve this market better. And so, whether that's labeled DEI or woke or not, it's just smart business. And so that, for me, gives me optimism, because at the end of the day, we're a capitalist society, and that's going to be the driver. And I see where the future growth is.
And growth is growth.
Exactly.
And businesses do not grow without broader markets?
Yeah, I mean, I think this area is where there will be tougher conversations with the new administration. I think it's important for everyone to make sure you've educated yourself on what is, statutory versus administrative. At the end of the day, the duty to affirmably further fair housing is still in law, as ill-defined as it might be. Disparate impact was upheld by the Supreme Court. Special purpose credit programs are statutorily authorized. So we just have to be careful with like really where the power lies. And I think there's a lot of reason to be concerned with the trends in administrative law and with the trends in terms of more going to courts and the trends of courts. This is why our vote really matters. But I do think it's gonna, again, turn to a lot of private sector just modeling good behavior, nonprofit sector providing legal support for tenants and folks facing discrimination, knowing where to file complaints and to get legal aid. But there's no spin I can put on this one. I think it's going to be really, really tough, and I would anticipate the first 100 days just being, I think, especially dramatic in terms of the actions I think we can anticipate in this space.
Rodney?
Yeah, to your point, the Fair Housing Act and other civil rights legislation, that doesn't go away depending on which administration's in. Those obligations are still there, there's responsibilities there. And, I want to raise one thing here, which is the time piece, that today's older adults were born before the Fair Housing Act was passed. There are neighborhoods, often, for many years, that were shaped when segregation was explicitly legal. And we've also can talk about the unfair practices that are happening today and continue. So these are issues that are impacting folks. And frankly, whether you want to take a civil rights lens, just a general fairness lens, or an economic lens to look at and understand which groups of people are being impacted, which parts of the community physically and geographically are impacted, you can take whatever angle you'd like and come to the same conclusion that we've got to make sure that every community has the benefits that we're talking about at this table here. And so the way we talk about it might shift depending on the trends of the time, the words we might use, the language we might use may shift, but that responsibility is still there.
Yeah.
So we, NEF created a specialized fund in 2021 to support Black and brown developers that are in the light tech space. And there's all sorts of systemic racism that prohibits, in general, the growth and scale of people that don't have generational resources in the light tech space. And that fund was specifically designed to address that that issue. I'll take maybe a little bit of a positive spin or a silver lining here. The fact that we can't be quite as explicit about those initiatives at this point has actually accelerated our adoption internally and with our partners to fully bake a lot of those initiatives into our day-to-day business. It's become standard operating procedure so that it's not carved out, it's not highlighted necessarily as it may have been as a separate fund or as a separate initiative, but has now just been largely, unfortunately we haven't been able to integrate all of it into our day-to-day operations, but we have sort of very, very deliberately done that. And I hope that people take this opportunity to reflect on what they've been doing and how they can adopt it in their day-to-day practices.
I love that, Matt. And I would just say that's something we've been talking a lot too about. And I think this fits into how you started this, like this anti-woke backlash, that racial equity and equity in general needs to be a lens to all of our work, not a lane. And when we made it a separate lane, we made it a target. But it should just be how we approach our work, asking ourselves who's at the table, who's truly benefiting, who's hurting, and it just needs to be integrated into what we do.
Yep.
Great point.
I have to say, in 1996, I started at the Fannie Mae, and was it 96? No, it was actually 94. Time flies when you're having fun. But I was at the operating committee meeting and looked around the table. It was my first day in the job, and the vice chair was African American. The head of multifamily housing was Jamaican. The treasurer was a woman. The head of risk management was a Hispanic man. And this is before anybody even was using the term woke or DEI or any of that. And the head of human resources and the head of affordable housing were white guys. And I looked around the table and I was like, these guys get it. This is just how we do business here. And I think that's really first principle for me is how do we do business? And how are we serving markets? And I don't really care what we call it as long as we're moving the numbers forward and helping people actually achieve and grow wealth. So thank you all for being with us. And this was a great conversation for me. I hope everyone else enjoyed it as much. And we're going to be doing a lot of hard work together.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to exit this one.
Thank you. Thank you, David and everyone. So we're going to take a quick 10-minute break to head into our breakout sessions. They'll start in 10 minutes. For those who are interested in attending the Navigating Insurance Challenges and Rising Costs in the Housing Industry, it will take place in the ballroom right here. For those who will be heading towards the heirs property and the preservation of generational wealth, that will take place in the MWL rooms, which are located on the other side of the lobby. So just head out here like you're going back to the registration area and then make a left. Thank you, everyone.